All right, thank you very much and welcome to Maximizing Egg Quality in Enriched and Aviary Systems. Thank you for taking your time to be with us today. Normally we would like to be in front of you, but with this current situation and the restrictions to the number of people that we have, we're going to offer you a webinar today. Like I said, the talk is going to be about maximizing egg quality in enriched and aviary systems. We're going to ask you to have some patience. There's going to be some times where we're going to be switching speakers and switching screens. That takes a second with the technology. And we have some backup plans if we have technology problems, but please, I'd ask you to be patient, and we'll do our best to make sure this works well and comfortably for everyone. We have a number of speakers, and they're brought to you by a number of companies. It's a team effort. We have myself from Dutchman. We have J.D. Williamson coming from J.D. Williamson Ltd. The Farm Credit Corporation are going to have Ted Oak and Craig Kelmer. We have Erica Blair from Big Dutchman and Mark Doyle from Agricon. Given the situation that we all find ourselves in, it's become important that we can't ignore the COVID crisis that we have before us. And with that in mind, we're going to have the people from Farm Credit Corporation. They're going to give us an economic update and a COVID-19 program update. First, we'll hear from Ted Oak. Ted is from a farm first we'll hear from Craig, my apologies. Craig is a principal economist with the Farm Credit Corporation. He is experienced in agriculture markets and risk analysis. And he has specializes in macroeconomics and monitoring industry health, providing industry risk analysis. He is also a contributor to the Farm Credit Corporation, where he lives with his 4 children and his wife, Tara. He is active in the community, coaching girls hockey, as well as a counselor for South Huron. He received his Bachelor of Science in Agriculture from the University of Guelph. And over the past 20 years, he's worked in various roles in government, ag business, lending, and he is currently a senior relationship manager with the Farm Credit Corporation. All right, with that, I'll turn it over to Craig to start his presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Just going to have my screen shared. Hopefully everybody can see my screen okay. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, I'd encourage everybody to put it in the block or in the question Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. And we'd be more than happy to answer those questions at the end of the presentation. So with that, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to talk about a couple things. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about who FCC is and what we do and where we sit in the marketplace. And then I'm going to focus on a couple areas, looking at the macro economy in terms of opportunities that we see and how those trends are going to be driving the operating environment and how it's going to impact your business. And then finally, we'll look at some consumer trends here and how that could be impacting your business here moving forward here. So with that, I'll just start off here. If we look at FCC, I guess just who we are, we're a federal crown corporation. We founded in 1959. FCC provides financial and business services to agriculture in Canada. This includes lending to primary producers, value-added operations, suppliers, and processors along the agriculture value chain. We have a mandate from the federal government to support the growth and prosperity in Canadian agriculture. And we do this by serving all of agriculture all the time in all sectors across all of Canada and advancing the business of agriculture. And that's kind of who we are and where we stand. Just a little bit about us. You know, our head office is located in Regina. In fact, we're the largest agriculture lender in Canada. We have a portfolio of about $38 billion, and we serve over 100,000 customers. To do this, we have about 2,000 employees with about 700 in head office, and then 1,300 employees across the country to make us accessible to you and your businesses, to just understand your needs and to move your business forward and be trusted partners with you. So I'm going to go right into, the nuts and bolts and kind of my specialty and the area that I follow and what's kind of close to my heart and what I think is really important for your business to understand in some of these macro trends that we see. So obviously, with COVID-19 is creating world disruptions. It's having major impacts to economies around the world. And this chart here, it's a table that's put together from IMF. And what I'm taking here is just kind of GDP. And this is pretty important because it drives a lot of those macro trends. And I want to kind of shape what do we see in Canada and what are some of those outside influences that are impacting us. So if we look at this from the big picture, GDP in Canada is expected to decline around 7.5–8% this year. Similar kind of contraction in the United States, our largest trading partner. And overall GDP growth is expected to decline about 5.2%. And if you kind of look at the chart, the red shows the countries that are expected to have fairly large negative expansion or declines in GDP. And even countries like China expected to have slight declines in GDP this year just because of the impact of COVID and the changes and shifts in demands in developing economies and around the world there. So big disruptions right now happening, and that in your businesses, and we felt that across the agriculture sector and the impact that that's having on companies and businesses here. So if we look at Canada specifically, so what's kind of contributing to this 8% decline in Canada's GDP? And there's a couple of things that I think that I would really highlight as impacts that are going to impact our businesses and impact some of the things that are driving fundamentals in our businesses in the poultry industry and in the egg industry specifically. So one is we got government debt increasing right now. We've seen a lot of government programs happening right now. We have CERB benefits. We have wage subsidy benefits. There's been a number of different benefits that provided on rent control and things out there to support companies and support the overall economy. And really a lot of that debt that's been taken on is really due to this weak labor market and softness that we've seen there. And then obviously we're seeing some struggles in commodity prices. When we think about agriculture, we've seen some pretty dismal and some challenging times across the commodity market. We've seen some reductions in quota and supply managed. We've seen processing disruptions, in several different sectors, and all these different things are coming into play. Not to mention, at one point, we actually had negative Western Texas intermediate prices and oil prices. So, some of these challenges kind of coming through to the Canadian economy and stuff that I think are important to monitor. So as I mentioned, one of the things, if we look at government debt, this is important for a couple of reasons, because when we look at what is the deficit of Canada relative to GDP, it's going to show the attractiveness of the Canadian economy for outside investors. And, this is going to be important for two reasons. One is, at some point debt is going to have to be repaid. But two, as we see shifts in terms of the attractiveness of the Canadian economy for outside investment, it's going to impact or drive the value of the Canadian dollar. And also, as we start seeing, higher interest rates or higher government debt, and you see more and more of these bond markets going to impact the interest rates ultimately for businesses and companies in Canada here. So if we look at this government debt picture right now, we're moving to a debt to GDP in Canada of about 48%. And this is significantly higher than we were. But that being said, we're doing quite a bit better than other economies too. So, we were in a pretty favorable position when we look at it from the ratio of debt to GDP, moving from around that 33% to this 48%. And we could see some further adjustments on this. But, what we do see is this is one of the largest deficits that we've had since the mid-90s, and when we had to make some tough decisions as a Canadian economy to get ourselves out of that. So, one thing we do see is this high government debt levels, and that's going to be driving, expenditures and opportunities for investment over the next little bit. The second thing that I think is really important to monitor and getting into not only impacts of the economy, but also opportunities and driving consumption pattern. So, we had the highest unemployment rate in history at about just over 13% back in April, I believe it was. And, that was one of the highest levels that we've had in history. So just kind of speaks to the challenges that the Canadian economy is having. If we look at where we are right now, we still see, weak labor market across all provinces. However, we are seeing some big improvements. Unemployment rates in Canada right now are just under 11%. So that's, it's something to be optimistic about. I don't think it's something we need to be celebrating by any means. If we look at this time period a year ago, we were at about unemployment rates of about 5.6%. So, we have twice the unemployment rate now where we were a year ago, just because of those impacts of COVID. And if you look at different provinces, I picked two here, Ontario and Alberta, looking at unemployment rates above that 11%. So we continue to see some weaknesses in by region and by province. So it's pretty uniform across the board, though, looking at around that 10 or to 12% range for most provinces. The good news story is that, from the highest rate of unemployment, we are seeing some more attractiveness into the workforce. More people are starting to actively look for jobs right now. So from that perspective, I think that's a good news story. People are re-entering the workforce and trying to look for employment right now. But when you look at where we are right now, about 22%, just over 22% of our workforce is underutilized. And a lot of the growth that we've seen more recently has been in that part-time farming or part-time work. So this is really important when we think about our businesses, because it's going to impact that demand for eggs. It's going to impact that demand for people to get out into the economy, purchasing food on the go, purchasing our products. So it's going to impact that side of things. And that's one of the things we'll have to be monitoring moving forward. As I mentioned, all this stuff kind of makes a big difference for your business for a couple of reasons. And from the macro perspective, the two biggest ones are going to be borrowing costs as well as the price of the Canadian dollar. So if we look at average borrowing costs, and what I'm showing here is an average business borrowing cost, it's a combination of fixed and variable rate products. And the good news story is that we continue to see borrowing costs declining right now. And this creates many opportunities for businesses that are in a position that are looking to expand for the future. Borrowing costs are some of the lowest they've been in quite some time. Money's really cheap right now for operations that are in the right position, and it could mean a really good opportunity for you and your operation to make an investment. And when we look at the trends here, high debt from the Canadian government, high household debts that we see in Canadians, the continued struggles in the Canadian economy, contraction this year, it doesn't look like we're just going to see any movement in the short term in 2020, in 2021 from the Bank of Canada that would signal that we'd see higher interest rates for businesses in the near term. That being said, if you're going in and you're having conversations with your financial institution or borrowing partner, you may see some adjustments on risk, just because we're seeing more risk right now. Depending on how your financial year was, those kind of conversations can be coming into play, and we have heard some businesses talk about that and impacting those decisions. The second thing that I think is really important to take out of this in terms of macro things influencing your business is going to be the dollar. And, despite the, weak oil prices right now, if we look at where we are, the Canadian, Western Canadian Select is trading at about $30 a barrel right now. So it's pretty discounted. That being said, our good businesses are creating some stability there. We're starting to see a little bit more investment or encouraging signs of investment in the oil sector. And that's important because that's one of the bigger draws of foreign investment into the Canadian economy. We're also seeing some resources picking up some speed. We see some really strong gold prices right now. Other commodities are seeing some opportunities as well. So, where we're seeing this right now is we expect the Canadian dollar to average around 73 cents for 2020. Currently, there's a little bit more bullishness in the market, and we could see this go a little bit higher. But uncertainty about U.S. economy, uncertainty about demand for some commodities, and the movement of goods into the U.S. and how that's going to impact the recovery here in Canada are all things that are going to come into play that I think we're going to monitor. Our forecast right now is a little bit more on the bearish side, averaging around that 73 cents. Could see it, move up a little bit to 74 cents as an average for 2020. Just kind of shifting gears, what does this mean for your business in terms of consumption and some patterns that that these macro factors are going to impact for the marketplace. And, obviously it's really going to be on consumption. And, here's a chart that maybe you've seen quite a bit, but I'm looking, this is a US perspective, and please forgive me, I'll work through it in terms of Canadian perspectives. But if we look at US purchases of food, about 50% or just over 50% of food expenditures in the US prior to COVID were away from home, restaurants, food services. Well, only 49% of services or slightly less was at home, so grocery purchases. So we see that dynamics in terms of demand. If you look at Canada specifically, it's a little bit different. We don't have quite the same research out there from the Canadian perspective, but we look at about 37 to 40% of food purchases were at restaurants, and 60-65% of food purchases were at home. With COVID here, we've seen that major shift, and I know that we've seen that in demand for food services, and now that businesses are reporting their quarterly returns and how they've done, we're seeing those challenges impacting the food services. And one of the big areas that took a major hit was sit down restaurants, but quick grab restaurants, places like Tim Hortons, McDonald's, all took some major hits. And a lot of people that were on the go lifestyles, people are now working from home, so they're not going in and purchasing that breakfast sandwich on the way. That's going to impact demand for eggs. It's going to have an impact on our products here and moving forward. So I guess that being said, as economies start opening up, as the Ontario economy is starting to open up, as economies across the country are starting to open up, we're seeing more and more people heading back to the office. We have no idea what that new normal is going to look like. So, forecasting is going to be really difficult, but we do see a desire to get people back into the offices, getting people back into the economy. And we're going to see sporting activities starting to pick up, and people are going to be back on the go. And that's going to increase that demand. So, when I think about this industry and where things are moving, I'm pretty optimistic that we're going to see a pretty good return of that overall demand in the short to medium term here, if we think the over 6 months or maybe 12-month period here, as the economies keep opening up. That being said, people have had some tightening of their overall financial budgets. CERB and government programs have propped up the economy in the short term. As we see some of those programs starting to unwind, there's going to create some uncertainty about just how healthy are consumers and what are their pockets looking like, and how is that going to impact further demand for food and products, and does that mean they're going to keep doing the quick grab meals on the go, or does it mean they're going to be cooking more breakfast foods at home before leaving? Do we see continued baking and active baking and the strong demand for baking goods, flour and eggs, for example, at home, or people too busy and stop pulling back on some of those purchases moving forward? So, I think a lot of these things are coming into play and things that we're going to have to be monitoring moving forward. So, in the short term, I guess where I see the egg industry and the poultry industry is, I think that there's lots of opportunities. I do think that we're going to start seeing a more return to normal. Demand is going to start, recovering, and we're starting to see that already. But as we see more and more of the Canadian economy reopen, we're going to see that recovery happen. And for operations that are in a good position to take advantage of some of these challenges that we've seen, there could be some real opportunities for your operation. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for the time. And if you have questions, please put them in the question box, and we'd be more than happy to answer them at the end of the presentations here. So I'll turn it back over here. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ted Oak. I'm Senior Relationship Manager, as Ron mentioned, and I work out of the FCC office in Clinton. I've had the privilege to work with many poultry producers through my career, and also, during construction projects, and that's what I'm going to focus on here today. Construction it's an exciting time, but it's time to make sure the process is done correctly. As we know, it costs a lot of money to build these things these days. At FCC, we've got significant experience in ag lending, so we can help you stick handle through the challenges as they arise. I'll give you an overview of how FCC makes some lending decisions and some of the financial solutions we've developed for the industry. FCC's general lending philosophy is cash flow repays loans, not equity. History is a good predictor of the future, and there must be realistic expectations that the operation will generate enough cash to make its debt payments. There are a lot of numbers that we review when we look at your historical numbers, and we look at with projections as well. Some of the key ratios that we look at with you is the following: current assets, sort of current ratio, leverage ratio, which is debt to equity, debt service coverage ratios, and operating expense ratios. Every industry has different guidelines when it comes to these ratios. There's a big difference between crop farmer versus layers versus dairy. So we all have certain targets. For example, we like to see in the layer side a current ratio of 0.5 to 1 to 1, leverage ratio less than 1.5 to 1, debt service coverage of 1.15 to 1. So there's a number of different things, and every operation is a little different. Budgets, projections, and cash flow forecasts are very important to have and prepare on some of these large projects. And we have some tools and we can assist in that process as well. At FCC, we can finance a lot of different things: land, quota, machinery, construction, renovations. And our amortization philosophy is to align the amortization with the life expectancy of the asset. No sense paying for something that's long gone from your farm, so we try to match it. Analysis is done on a debt repayment ability, and we have short and long-term financing products. At FCC, we have over 25 kinds of loan products, but I'll quickly go over 3 of them that are suitable for maybe a construction project. And those are the Advancer Loan, the Construction Loan, and the Young Farmer Loan. Our Advancer Loan is really a loan that I liken to a capital line of credit, where it's pre-approved for multiple draws when you need funds. It offers an open variable rate, interest-only payments, and the ability to convert to a term loan at any time. If you felt that rates were going to start climbing, you could always lock in the term. Our FCC construction loan is you can defer the principal payments while you're being built, while you're building or expanding, and with interim financing for up to 18 months on construction projects. And that means the borrowers can access funds at key stages in the project, and you don't have to pay principal until the project is complete and the revenue has started. And then we also have a young farmer loan, and so we can do a down payment as much as 20% minimum on these, and it's up to $1 million. Anything over the $1 million would be at 25%, which is used to support the purchase or improvement of farmland or buildings. The loan's designed to meet the needs of young farmers with special interest rates and no loan processing fees, and it's eligible for any young farmer under 40. And it can be used to purchase a farm or expand a business or make improvements. We've developed at FCC a checklist, a construction checklist that we go through with producers. And first off, if you were to hire a general contractor, some of the things to consider is, do you have a fixed contract, and have you set up payments or a proportionate work schedule? Have you completed a budget, and have you built in the idea of cost overruns? Because as good as the contracts are out there, there are some times where things do happen. And so we like to plan for an extra 20 or 25% for unexpected costs in our loan approvals, just in case. It's easier to see about getting them approved than going back in after. Do you have detailed quotes from the contractors, and have you, in some cases, the references? There's a lot of barns that are being built, so it's easy to get the good, bad, ugly on some things. Do you have liability insurance, construction liability, or builder's risk? It's very important in case something happens during construction. And are all the permits in place? If you're building it yourself, a lot of the same things is, do you have itemized cost and estimates and materials and labor budget? Again, we need to build in some overruns, and do you have some detailed quotes from some of the subcontractors? It's always nice to get more than one quote out there just to check things. And again, we also need the insurance side of things as well. And then other consideration is commit to a project plan, and keep it as close as you can. Once you start straying, then things can get out of hand when it comes to costs. And then plan for your site inspections. Work ahead of time to get your nutrient management plan. That sometimes can be a delay, and so that's something that's needed to get your building permit. So my top 3 recommendations when looking at a building project is, number 1, do your homework. Have a budget with solid written quotes for all items when you approach a lender. My second one is build in the 20 to 25% to your budget. It's amazing how, how close sometimes it can get to that. And we also number 3 is don't forget the HST in your cash flow. Because if you haven't had a large remittance of HST recently, there is going to be likely some questions asked by the HST auditors, and there's a good chance that there might be an audit to prove what you are actually doing. So we try to build that into the project as well, and so that it's covered until you can get that money back. So COVID's been a challenge in the past few months. That's sort of an understatement, but so to ensure producers, agribusiness, and food processors continue to have access to necessary capital and to remain focused on business critical functions, FCC has put COVID-19 customer support programs in place. These programs include a deferral of principal and interest for up to 6 months for existing loans, or a deferral of principal payments for up to 12 months. And we also have access to an additional credit line for up to $500,000 secured by general security agreements. So those are some of the things that we can do to the first couple for existing customers, and then the credit line is available for existing or new customers. We've also come up with a COVID term loan, and both of these programs, the credit line and the term loan, are available to FCC and non-FCC customers. And this loan is up to $2.5 million, 18 months interest-free option available if you need, and a 10-year amortization on it. It's meant to provide additional working capital support to some of the larger farms and businesses by taking on a little bit greater risk on amortization and security. These are a few of the programs that we're offering out there, but there are a number of other ones that are available, and your accountant would be the best source of information on these. And last, FCC supports not only financially, but we have additional resources to help build resilience for you and your family and team operations. Visit our wellness or COVID pages to look more into Rooted in Strength. It's a great resource, and you might have seen some of the information that FCC has helped push out. So with that, I'll leave, that's the end of my presentation, and I guess we'll take questions at the end of the presentation.
All right. Thank you very much, Ted. Again, as everybody has been saying, we'll be answering questions at the end. Please put them in the question and answer box in the bottom of the screen. And I will be taking over from here for a little bit. My name's Ron Wardrop. I'm the Canadian Sales Manager for Big Dutchman. Been in agriculture for about 30 years, everything from running farms to working for feed companies and also in the pharmaceutical business, and been with Big Dutchman for about 3 years. What we're here today to talk about is the maximizing our egg quality. And what brought the subject up was there seems to be a perception in the field from producers that we're talking to that if they go to aviary or to enriched housing systems, their egg quality will suffer with cracked and checked eggs or dirty eggs. Again, we're seeing this perception that people think that they're going to have a lot higher cracked and dirty eggs. Well, that is true. If you use some simple management techniques, we can get clean eggs. These are pictures from some of our customers in an enriched system and cage-free systems that are seeing the same or lower dirty and cracked and checked eggs in their new systems, either cage-free or enriched, than they were seeing in their aviary systems. There are a couple of things that are very, very important, and we're going to break this up today in enriched, aviary. We're going to go through the building and how it's important to make the building right from the start and get your equipment set up properly. And then finally, we're going to look at what happens to the egg after it leaves your farm. Alternative housing systems are superior to conventional housing systems in the humane treatment and handling of the birds. But it does take a lot more management, especially in the aviary systems. When set up properly and managed, alternative housing systems have the same or better egg quality than conventional cages. From a management point of view, we got to look at how the birds are reared. We have to manage the birds differently because they have more space and more room to move. And we have to look at the daily activities, what we do in the barn and what the birds do in the barn. From the systems we have in the barn, we have to make sure the barn's ventilated well and evenly. We have to look at how the systems are managed, how we use that equipment that we've been given, how those systems are programmed. So we have to play with them and make sure they suit our situation in the barns and your situations in the barns. And we have to look at exactly how that barn's laid out. We're here to help. I say that a little bit facetiously. Today's presentation will walk through the key areas to ensure we have high quality eggs. Common to all the systems, whether they are aviary or whether they're enriched, there's a couple things that are common to all of them. Nest acceptance is very important. So we've gone from a conventional cage where the eggs are laid wherever the birds happen to be standing to getting them into a nest and controlling that flow of eggs. We want to make sure that the nests are darker than the rest of the area. They're calm, so there's no traffic going through them. And just generally a place where the hen feels welcome to go lay their eggs. We have to make sure that the nest pads are clean and secure. We can't place lights directly in the nests. They have to be lit in the high traffic areas and darker in the nest area. We have to use a feeding program. We can't just have the feed belts come on at any time. We don't want to be feeding those birds during peak lay times. We have to program our egg belts so that the egg belts move and we don't get piles of nests or eggs coming out right behind the nests. So we move at the length of the nest to make sure that those eggs aren't bumping into each other. And we have to make sure that we're handling our eggs properly. Make sure our elevators are well maintained. Oops. and keep them adjusted if there's adjustments needed, and keep the egg handling equipment clean and functioning well as part of your maintenance program. When it comes to enriched systems, there are a few things that we need to look at. As you can see, the enriched system here, we have our nest area over here, we have our traffic area through here, and we have our scratch area along with perches and feed troughs and our egg belts. These are very key areas in the nests. We have to look at where the nest placement is, and we'll touch on that. We have to look at how we keep that nest clean and tidy. We have to look at the lighting of the system. We have to look at the egg belt programming, again with our feeding, and we have to use our egg saving devices that come with our systems. The nest placement. This is probably one of the bigger ones that we need to look at with enriched systems. And we've learned a lot as the time's gone on with these systems. You see that we place the nest at the very front of the system, as close to the egg belt as we can. We don't want that egg. When some of the systems, when they first came out, we put the nest back in this corner, back over here. The egg was laid and then it had to roll through a traffic area down under the feed trough onto the egg belt. Well, those eggs would get pecked, they'd get hit by hens, and that wasn't good. We were seeing some high dirty eggs because that area wasn't as clean, and we were seeing some eggs that got pecked and kicked as they went through. So we want to make sure that that nest is right up at the front. Nest maintenance. It's important, especially with the AstroTurf kind of nest pads, that these nests are kept clean. We have to maintain the dirt building up on them and the manure building up on them. They can trap and get enough manure in places. They can trap eggs on a nest. Again, the birds can get at them and damage them. But they can also cause dirty eggs. What we're finding over time is that the nests that are lit properly, if those nests are kept dark, the birds don't spend a lot of time in them. They go in, they lay their egg, and they tend to come out back into where they can see, eat, and drink. And we're seeing the nest pads stay much, much cleaner. So it takes some time to go in, look at those nest pads, make sure they remain clean, and make sure that we're keeping a good close eye on them. The lighting and the privacy. This is important for nest acceptance. We need to make sure that we receive a high nest acceptance. In a well-managed enriched barn, we're seeing as high as 98% nest acceptance from the birds. So, and the way I've said this a number of times, but as you can see in this picture, this is a very well-lit enriched system. You can see that the nest areas are dark, and the traffic areas, the feeding, the scratch, and the watering area remains very well lit. This is done through the nest curtains, as you can see here, and not just literally not putting the lights in the nests. Each cage, as you can see, we've arranged it so they're back to back. So from here, this is a cage, and from here, this is a cage. It assists in the lighting of the nest system. This system is also lit. This is a system in Shakespeare, Ontario. This system is lit inside the cage, and they don't use any aisle lights at all unless they're there for maintenance of the system. It also means that we have to make those nest curtains are as close to the floor as we can get them to ensure the privacy inside the nest. So if the hen's in laying her eggs, she can't see outside of it and doesn't get spooked. And we have to ensure that the light control doesn't get into that part of the nest as well. If you do these things, you'll have very good nest acceptance. Egg control, we have to make sure that those eggs are controlled when they come out of the hen and onto the belt. There's two systems that we use here. We have the egg saver wire. So what that does is after the egg comes out, it runs into this wire to come down and crash into either the other or the edge of the egg belt trough. And then those wires are released on a program basis, and those eggs are left to roll down onto the belt from a much smaller distance. As well, that wire absorbs any shock if the eggs get any speed to them at all. And then the egg belt itself is jogged. We call it jogging. It's moved during peak lay times. So every 15, 20 minutes, depending, all of these numbers are going to change with the situation in your barn. So if you know your birds start laying at a certain time every morning, you want to move that egg belt the length of the nest every so often so that the eggs get a chance to get evenly distributed along that belt. The other thing that we've learned very quickly is that we need to make sure that those cages are divided down the middle, and half the birds have access to one side of the nest and half the birds have access to the other side of the nest. A lot of the systems that were put out didn't put a center divider in the cage. And what we found is either from light or ventilation, one nest side would get preferred over the other. And we would literally overcrowd the egg belt and not have enough room for all the eggs that were laid. And the other side of that would be easily have none in it. So we recommend always putting a center divider in. That also works when it comes time to catch the birds. The nests aren't quite as big and allow us to go and look in a much easier way to catch those birds and keep the catchers much more happy. Now, when it comes to feeding, now we have to worry about whether we have a feeding program or not. The biggest thing, and there are a ton of feeding programs out there, everybody has their own that they like to use. However, there's a couple important things that we have to make sure that we do. And that one is, don't interrupt the birds during that peak laying process. So when the lights come on in the morning, fill up the troughs, give them a feed, but after that peak laying time starts, don't feed them again until that's over, and then feed them on regular intervals throughout the day. And you'll have to develop your own feeding program. But this allows birds to stay within the nest and lay those eggs, because birds are very Pavlovian. The minute they hear that belt run, I'm sure everybody knows, they run out of the nest and they're called to eat. So it doesn't matter what they're doing at that time. That instinct is much stronger than where they laid their egg. The other thing we have to do is make sure that we cap off the feeding area here in front of the nest. That's also part of the regulations. Very traffic down inside the nest. If I could ask you to put the tour up, please. We'll take you inside a barn now so that we can look at these systems. As you can see, first of all, there's the cap in front of the nest area. What this does is it keeps those birds out of that traffic area. This particular system continues to meet the regulations for feeder space. There was lots of extra, so we just cap that off and make sure that we can bring that nest to the front. Again, here's your curtains. Those birds can brood. They can sit down, and they can look at laying their egg without seeing outside the nest or getting disturbed by somebody walking by. The regulations say that we have to have cover or curtains on 3 sides, but because the nests are back to back across the system and the nests in the front, you end up with all 4 sides being covered and giving them great privacy. All right, Tony, can we go to the outside with the... All right. When I was talking about jogging those egg belts, if you look across here, you'll see the even distribution of the eggs. That's a farm. There's a farm out near Hanover, Ontario, that we've used it for our pictures. And you can see that the egg belt programming is working very well on this farm. They're keeping that egg belt moving during peak lay times and before collection time. and they're making sure that all those eggs are evenly distributed across the belt and not getting built up across and becoming a problem with them crashing into each other and getting cracked and checked. All right, if you have any questions, make sure that you're putting them into the question and answer part of the Zoom application. And Tony, I'll ask you to stop sharing. And I'd ask Erica to start sharing her screen. The next section we'll be looking at is our aviary systems, and that'll be presented by Erica Blair. Erica lives with her fiance on a farm in Topeka, Indiana. God, I hope I said that right.
Tampico.
Okay, well, I guess I didn't. I practiced it a number of times and didn't get it right. She went to the University of Eastern Kentucky, where she got a degree in agriculture, and then went on to Kansas State University, where she received her master's in animal and breeding genetics. Erica's only job in Big Dutchman is that she's our aviary specialist. It's her job to go out when people get a new system and then help producers learn how to use them properly. I would encourage everybody, when you come time to choose a system, choose a company that has some
Can you guys hear me okay?
You bet we can hear you and we can see
Okay,
your
I think
screen.
we had a little glitch there for a second. So thank you, Ron. Again, I'm Erica Blair. I'm an aviary system specialist with Big Dutchman, which means I get the opportunity to travel to our customers' our aviary farms, whether that be layers or on the pullet side even, and I help them with the flock management of their birds. So in the beginning, with a pullet farm, that might be going in and teaching them about how to set up their lighting schedule or their feeding schedule, helping them to train the birds to go up into the system at night, anything like that. We're going to go over all those different subjects here in a second, because in an aviary system, what I always like to say is that the better trained that the pullets are, the more likely we're to have better outputs from them when they're at the hen stage. And so that could be egg quality, for example. And so what I want to talk about today is how can we maximize egg quality through how we manage these aviary systems. And we're going to go through pullet systems and layer systems as well. So starting with the just kind of generalization of aviary systems. Aviary systems are going to be a little bit different from, say, your conventional cage systems or your enriched systems, just because we do present the hens with additional space, which also presents them with additional challenges. A lot of what I might talk about today is the same that you just heard from Ron, but there are going to be some differences as well. So when we give those hens some additional space, we give them the opportunity to lay floor eggs or to make that decision to pile on each other, which we're going to see stress and mortality from. And then, of course, we're going to see reduced egg quality from that. But again, we're just going to start by talking about pullets, some of those management tips that we can take. And then we're going to actually take a look inside of a pullet barn. So I'm going to be going back and forth here between a PowerPoint presentation and also the tours, and we're going to go back and forth. So my internet has been a little spotty today, so if I zone out on you guys for a little bit, I'll be back with you shortly. So, but great pullets start with great hens, and I say that a lot, and that's why I really stress a lot of visits to pullet farms and our customers that recently get a pullet facility, because it's easier to train a good pullet than it is to train a hen that has developed bad habits. So once we get to that point at the layer stage, if they've already developed some bad habits, those are going to be really hard to break. So we want to make sure we train those pullets the way we need them to go into an aviary system before they get to the layer system. So the big management points that I want to talk about with pullets is teaching them to navigate that system. And that's going to include going to find water, going to find feed. So not just consuming feed or consuming water, but actually seeking it out and actually going to find that. Where is that feed trough? Where is that water nipple? And then the other thing is also navigating the system and being able to move from the litter aisle back into the system, both during the day and at night. And this is vital because at the layer stage, we want them to go back in to the system at night, because wherever they wake up is usually where they're going to lay their eggs. So if they're sleeping on the floor, they're more likely to lay their eggs on the floor. So we want them sleeping in the system at night so that hopefully they're going to go into their nest and lay the next morning. And then also with aviary systems, we don't have feed and water on every tier. So we need them to be able to navigate and maybe go to a different tier to find that feed and water, and not just go hungry or go without water. But we'll talk a little more about that once we get to the layer side. But another management tip on the pullet side is to make sure you're walking your flock. Make sure they're comfortable with the people, even strange people that might come in there, or different sounds that the barn's going to make or that people walking in are going to make. The more calm and relaxed that those pullets are, they're going to be more calm and relaxed when they are hens in the barn. And then again, we're just going to have better output from those birds when they're calm. So I get the question a lot: how often should I walk my flock or my pullet barn? And my response is usually as often as you can. Whenever you have time, go walk your flock. And the reason I say that, and you can't walk your flock too much, but you can walk them too little. And ideally, if you can walk your flock 5 or 6 times a day, that would be great. But what happens when you walk your flock too little is those pullets begin to become flighty, and that can result in piling, and then those birds get stressed out, and that's not a good environment for the birds or for your workers as well. And then our next point, or our management point, is training them to go back into the system or to go in there to sleep at night, which I kind of already touched on. But then why is that important to maximizing egg quality? Again, the thought process is if they're sleeping in the barn or in the system, when they wake up, they're more likely to stay in there and lay the egg in the system, and ideally even in the nest. And then obviously we want them close to that feed and water so that we have a reduced number of starve outs and dehydrated birds. And then obviously a key there is to have a consistent lighting program with them. But once the pullets have learned to find feed, find water, and are trained to go back into the system at night, other than just continuing to acclimate them to walkers and people coming in with sounds and things like that, our job on the pullet side is done. So we're going to take a look here real quick. I'm going to change my screen, and we're going to take a look inside a pullet barn. Okay, so here is inside of a new aviary pullet system. This is Big Dutchman's Philia system. It's a 2-tier aviary pullet system. Just kind of glancing around, you're going to notice that the bottom down here, the bottom doors are closed. Obviously, we're not going to give those pullets access to underneath the system until after they've learned to go up into the system at night. So it's going to be, several weeks, almost 12 weeks of age before we allow them access underneath the system. And then when we release them from the system, depends on what type of birds they are and things like that. But they're going to be out of the system much before that. Before we place birds, or when we're placing birds, this front partition door will go down to halfway. That's for easy placement of those chicks, as well as being able to hand feed them. And we'll look at some different pictures here. So this is kind of another view of a pre-placement stage. So before the birds come in, and we can look at the water line here. So you can notice this is inside the system. The water line is lowered. So we want to make sure that our water pressure is good so that there's a droplet of water on that water nipple that is eye level with the chicks. So we want that droplet to be at the same level as those chicks' eyes so that they easily see that and that encourages them to consume water. And remember to trip those nipples several times throughout those first few days of the chicks being housed to continue to encourage them to drinking so we don't have dehydrated birds. And again, I'm not going to go into these topics a whole lot. If you have questions, you're welcome to drop them in the Q&A. I think we'll get to some of those at the very end. But also, you know, if you have any specific questions, a lot of this is going to depend on if they're white birds, are they brown birds, what kind of system are they even going to go into, even variations between our different aviary systems. So I encourage you, if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me personally. Email, call, text, whatever that may be. We can talk more specific management to your barn. But let's take a look here once we get to the bird placement. So here's another view, kind of that same look within the system. And now we have chicks in there. So the feed trough is overfilling with feed. Make sure you're hand feeding that to overfill that trough, ideally between 4 and 6 days. You'll notice where that water level, that water droplet's right with those chicks' eyes. Again, here's another view. You can see the papers within the system. Another look, kind of that angle where that water nipple is compared to those chicks' eyes. Now let's go to kind of look at when we release those chicks, what it looks like in the barn. So keep in mind, up until this point, the farm should have established a lighting schedule. So knowing that one day these birds are going to be released from the system, or these pullets are, we'll start dimming those lights and getting them used to that dim down cycle very early. So even when they're a couple days old, we'll start dimming that light to make sure that they're used to that. We want them to know, and they'll be mentally prepared even, to be aware of what time those lights are going to start dimming. For example, if they normally start dimming at 7 o'clock, they're going to know about 6 o'clock that in an hour or so those lights are going to start dimming. So a big management tip there is try not to change that dim down time very much. So if they're used to 7 p.m., don't dramatically switch them to a 6 p.m. Dim time. Throughout their life cycle, you're going to be adding light and taking away light sometimes even. So do as much of that changing as you can in the morning. You'll always have to do some change at the evening, but just make sure it's small increments. So if you can just change it 15 minutes or 30 minutes, try not to do hours worth of change on the in there, because like I said, they'll get used to that dim down time, say 7 o'clock, and they can't mentally, if you all of a sudden change that to 6 o'clock, they're not mentally prepared for that. And you're kind of mess with them a little bit. So try to keep your dim down time as much as you can, and try not to change that. And you'll notice even in this picture, the lights aren't really dimming yet, but a lot of the birds are already in the system, and they know that it's coming. Ideally, once these lights finally do come off, even those birds that are in the aisle there will be back up into the system. So let's take a look real quick here at some of the ramps and bridges that we place within the system prior to release. Again, the bridges are in there to help facilitate that movement from the aisle into that top tier, and then the ramp from that first tier up to that second tier once they are released. So we don't expect them just to be able to use perches. Those ramps and those bridges really aid in that movement. And we're just going to kind of keep taking a look here. Here's another look inside that system. And what's really unique about one of the big Dutchman systems, the Philia, is that interior platform that you'll see. I'm trying to circle it here. I think you can see my mouse. So it's that interior platform. And so even when the pullets are young, within the first week, they'll start wanting to jump. And that interior platform allows them to jump up onto that. And it's training them to do that jumping motion long before they're actually even released from the system. So that kind of gives them one step above pullets that don't really have that interior platform. Sometimes the first time they get that experience of jumping is once they're released, and then we're asking them to go back into the system at night. So here they're learning how to jump. And again, that's just an attribute to the training process that will help them. The other thing is on the water line. You'll notice that it's capable of moving up here on the side. So you'll continue to raise that water line as the pullet matures. You'll continue raising that up so it stays eye level with that pullet. But what we have the capabilities here even is to raise that water line all the way up past that platform so that they have to jump on that platform to get water. And again, this is preparing them for the layer barn because not every tier in an aviary layer barn has water. So it's teaching them to go find water even when it's not right in front of them. And then let's go ahead and we'll talk about the layer barn real quick as well. Well, mostly because this is actually where the eggs are going to be laid. So obviously this is what we care about when we talk about maximizing egg quality. So by the time, you know, what they've learned in rearing, by the time they get to the layer barn, they should successfully be able to find feed. They should be able to find water. They need to be able to navigate the system, whether that's going from the floor to into the system or from the bottom tier to the top tier. Even like in our Primus system where we have 3 tiers versus the 2 tiers. And then also we want to make sure that they're familiar with sounds and with workers as well. So how do we maximize egg quality in the aviary layer barn? One, we've talked about this before and I can't stress this enough. Start with a great pullet. Make sure you're putting the time and effort in there to train your pullets. It's going to make you it's going to be that much easier on you when they get to the layer barn. And I see some questions coming in, and we'll get to those at the end for sure. But definitely keep sending those in. Okay, we'll get to those. So how do we maximize? Start with the great pullet. Check mark. We went over how to do that. Okay. Eggs need to be laid in the nest area, okay? Oftentimes in the aviary systems, we have what we call a dedicated nest area. That's one of the benefits of having cage-free birds in an aviary. And oftentimes we see that astroturf nest that you saw earlier in Ron's presentation. You'll see curtains for privacy. And then oftentimes those nests are close to the egg belt, which Ron touched on as well and why that is important. And we'll look at those components more closely in the tour part as well. We'll take a look at a layer barn. But the big management tips that I have on a layer side in aviary systems for maximizing egg quality is to eliminate those mislaid eggs and those floor eggs. And sometimes our biggest culprit for that, for those issues can be lighting, okay? So make sure that if you have bright lighting underneath the system, make sure that in the aisles as well. I always recommend your lighting intensity underneath your system to be at 100%. So just always have it wide open. If these birds have access to underneath the system and it's not at 100%, you could potentially see some floor eggs, okay? Another thing that can cause floor eggs specifically is your litter quality. Or not just quality, but quantity as well. Make sure you don't have a lot of litter there laying on the floor. What happens when there is a lot of litter, they find it very comfortable to them to lay an egg down there. And then also another big thing is making sure you're walking your flock. I know I stressed that on the pullet side, but it's just equally as important on the layer side as well. So make sure that if that hen does decide to lay an egg in that litter, that the walkers are going through and that she's being disturbed while she's laying that, or that her egg is quickly picked up. If her egg is not being quickly picked up, and there's a lot of litter and it's really cozy, she's laid that egg, nobody's bothering her, nobody's walking, nobody's picking up her egg, she's gonna be like, this is a great place to lay my egg. I'm going to keep doing this. And then the hens next to her are going to see that and they're going to look. They're going to think the same thing. So it's going to kind of become a snowball effect, and that they'll continue. What was one egg yesterday, it's going to become 3 eggs the next day, and then 10 eggs if you're not walking your flock and getting those picked up as soon as you can. So as soon as they identify that area, and it's not necessarily on the floor, but even within the system of a place where they can lay their egg and it not be disturbed, if it's not in a nest, they're going to continue to lay their eggs there. And so again, that's a big factor on where they decide to have those floor eggs or where they decide to lay those mislaid eggs. And again, a mislaid eggs are eggs that are laid in the system, but not in the nest, okay? And sometimes those can be caused by a crowded nest area. So maybe she can't get in there to lay her egg, so she's just going to lay it over here in the corner instead. Or sometimes if the birds are too flighty, they may want to crowd to the back of the system, and then because they're all piled in there, they feel secure, and they're going to lay their eggs back there as well. So that's another reason why we want to walk our flock, to make sure that they're not being flighty. And then as far as affecting egg quality, when they lay their egg in the back of that system, that egg has a greater distance to travel up to that egg belt. So there's more opportunities for that egg to be kicked or stepped on by other hens. And then obviously that's going to affect our number of checks and cracks and things like that. And then again, as far as getting those mislaid eggs out of there in time, make sure you have like a mislaid egg belt or something like that that will help get those out of there quickly. So I'm going to go to the tour real quick here. There we go. Okay, so we're going to go back to the tour and we're going to look at the layer side. Okay, so this is the Big Dutchman step system. This is what I call a true aviary system, because what you'll notice is these birds have continual open access, meaning they can go from the top tier to the middle tier to the floor at any given time within the day. So at no time are they confined to any space. This is a complete open access system. There we go. And you'll notice that the step system has 3 tiers. The middle one having that dedicated nest area right there. A benefit of that is that it prevents them from not laying, or if they're laying in there, there's not other birds traveling through that nest area and potentially disturbing them, or even kicking on or stepping on their eggs. So this nest kind of has a slant to it, which allows the eggs to roll back to that center egg belt and that the hens don't have access to. So I'll continue playing this video. Those eggs will roll out at night and go to that belt. And so that's beneficial because it gets any of those old eggs out. It gets the dirt out. And then the other thing is actually it kicks all the birds out that are maybe still in there. So the reason we want that is we don't want those hens staying in there, because what we'll notice is they get broody or they get protective of that area. And when they get protective of that nest area, it causes other hens to not be able to go in there. And then you're going to see a greater number of mislaid eggs. So that's a good feature of that aviary system, is being able to kick them out that we don't see in other systems. And then Ron already touched on the egg saver wire. And this isn't necessarily an egg saver one. This is just a wire that prevents those eggs from falling out. But if it was going onto a belt, that wire would move to not allow those eggs to just run off into the system, onto the egg belt, and hit those other eggs at a speed. So we want to make sure that we can slow that down and not just have them rolling off onto that mislaid egg belt. And again, that's just going to help decrease your number of checks and cracks. Go back real quick to the PowerPoint. But those are some of the primary ways that we can reduce or kind of increase, or maximize egg quality within an aviary system as far as management tips. So again, on the pullet side, that's going to be training them so that they're used to activity and sounds and noises, making sure that they can go find feed and water, not just consume it, but actually go find feed and water. And then also we want to make sure that they're getting into the system to sleep at night so that they're laying in the nest. And then on the layer side, we want to make sure that we're decreasing that occurrence of floor eggs and mislaid eggs, reducing the amount of traffic within the nest, and then optimizing nest laying and features that support that egg quality as well. So that's the end of my presentation. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A at the bottom, and we'll get to those, I think, when the presentation is over. If you have specific questions, I just get a hold of me. Call me, text me, send me an email, whatever that may be. Again, my job at Big Dutchman is just to help producers. Just make sure you guys are successful with your aviary system. And so I'm happy to do that anytime. So again, thank you guys for joining our presentation today. And I'm going to turn it back over to Tony or Ron, sorry.
Thank you very much, Erica. That was excellent. Our next presentation will be from Mark Doyle. Mark has spent his 45-year career designing, engineering, selling, and managing ventilation and structures for the agricultural business throughout the world. Not only for poultry, but for swine, dairy, exotic breeds, and fruit and vegetable storage, to hit the highlights. For the past 21 years, he's been working for a building company, designing, selling, and managing custom engineered structures in over 75 countries. Mark is a VP of sales for Agricon and is here today to tell us about how building designs can affect our egg quality. There you go. Take it away, Mark.
Thank you, Ron. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time, the attendees, for going through the presentation. And I'd like to personally thank the Poultry Industry Council as well as Stream Communications for putting this webinar on for us and allowing myself and the rest of the panel members to talk. As Ron mentioned, I have a background in ventilation and buildings, and I'm going to share a few points today with everyone that's participating in this and hope that you can glean a little bit of information that might make your decisions in the future to help enhance egg quality as this discussion is. A few of the features that I will follow up in more detail are shown on the screen. When we think of a building, we really think of the cost of the building. How soon are we going to get it? How quick is it going to be built? But we also need to think about what is the total cost of ownership of the building, the equipment, the ventilation, and everything inside the building. We like to call it TCO, and I'll be mentioning it a few times in the few minutes that I'm speaking here today. Some of the features that affect our TCO on the building itself is how easy and fast is the building to erect? Are we deciding to buy an all-metal building, a building with the option of wood, or are we deciding to use a 100% lumber combination? We talk about flat ceilings and smooth drop ceilings to help us with our efficient and consistent airflow, smooth interior walls that don't have any obstructions, so they're easy to clean. There's no spot for any kind of buildup for biosecurity breaks. We don't like to see exposed columns or beams or trusses inside the building. We like to talk about even ventilation, end to end of the house, floor to ceiling. I visited many projects where we see in excess of 10 degrees C temperature fluctuations in some of these aviary and enriched systems. You all know as producers, you like to keep that into the 2 to 3 degree C range. And I'd like to think that the building works with the ventilation system in helping that happen. Insulation is a very important part of all ventilated buildings. All ventilation systems need insulation to help assist it. R value, or the resistance to heat transfer, is the key. The higher the R value you can put into your building, the better it will enhance the ventilation system. As I said, we'd like to think of easy to erect buildings. Nothing is worse than to get a structure at your site and then have to take the time to piecemeal the project together. Systems that are easily bolted together with simple tools that have been pre-engineered that can go up relatively quickly definitely enhance your total cost of operation. We like to think of our ceilings in our houses to help assist the ventilation system. We like drop ceilings that are flat. We can attach them to the bottom cords of trusses, just like you're familiar with, but we take special consideration into the way that the ceiling ribs actually move in the building or help the air move in the building. Laminar airflow helps the ventilation system and the air to get to the birds where we want them to be. As I mentioned earlier, we like to have smooth sidewalls. As long as we can keep smooth sidewalls in our houses, again, the air can move the way it was designed to move through the air inlets without obstructions. Again, notice no beams, no columns, or no exposed trusses. The pathogens, the dust, and most importantly, manure are minimized. We'd like to always spend time talking about our fans for our ventilation system. They are one piece of a large puzzle. The building design helps maximize the effectiveness of the fans, of course. We think about ventilation efficiency ratios. We think about CFM per watt. We think of our total airflow. If we don't have a tight building or a tight membrane around the animals, those individual ideas for the fans sometimes are minimized because air is coming not from where it was designed, it's coming from the leaks in the building. And we want to try to keep all leaks to an absolute minimum. You invest a lot in your fans and inlets. It's really the portion of the building system that the birds are actually getting the most effectiveness out of. If you think of investing the same amount of focus on the building design to ensure they get the maximum effectiveness, we think that your total cost of operation over the years of use will be significantly less, I'm sorry. In every Agricon building, we have specific elements that make your ventilation components work to their maximum efficiency. Building tightness cannot be emphasized. It is very important to let the air come into the structure from where it was designed to do, whether that be minimum air inlets, sidewall inlets, ceiling inlets, tunnel inlets, or evaporative cooling. We want air to come from those areas, not from cracks and crevices that could accumulate in the building or from improperly installed doors or ventilation systems. We as human beings have the ability to adapt to our environment. In the wintertime, we can add heaters in our homes. We can add more clothing to keep us warm. In the summertime, we can reduce how much clothes we wear, or we can add fans or cooling. We can move and get out of an uncomfortable environment. Birds don't have that ability. We have to make the ventilation system adapt for the birds, keep the birds comfortable summertime and wintertime, and also regulate not only the temperature, but the oxygen levels, the humidity levels, and the minimization of the ammonia levels. The building and the ventilation are what creates this environment to help this for the birds. One of the important areas of the building that we see, and I have seen through my career, where we find that the building's tightness is sometimes in question, is the foundation itself. We have to have the foundation in the building, no different than we have to have our teeth into a strong gum line in order to keep them over a long time period. We have weak gums, we have bad teeth, we have the problems for disease, and obviously our teeth coming out. The building is no different. It has to have a strong foundation as the basis to keep the building intact for many years of operation. The tighter the foundation and the building membrane are attached to each other, the more longevity that you're going to have. One of the areas of the building that we see, as I mentioned, in the tightness is on the right. I'm going to show you a slight, and I apologize, it's very, very hard to see, so I'll play it over. This is a tight building. It's running under minimum ventilation. Notice the air leakage in the building when they smoked it from the outside. Oftentimes we see this happen, and this is where wet litter and birds trying to pile up will occur. It's important to note that when you build your building, it is imperative to make a tight seal on the building. Another area that we feel is bringing structures into a more tight method is utilizing what we call insulated metal panels. These are panels that are fabricated with steel on the outside, steel on the inside, interior and exterior, with insulation in the middle. They come in varying thicknesses. They typically are done with tongue and groove and with a gasketed seal in the connection point. They go together very quickly, they're very affordable, and it makes the overall construction process of the building substantially less. And it gives a very nice smooth surface, as you can see with these panels on the left photograph. We try to ensure that with the building tightness and the ventilation system being properly operated, we have good dry litter in the house. We have consistent temperatures front to back, top to bottom, and obviously we're trying to maintain as much as possible uniformity in the cages and in the aisleway and keep the flock somewhat calm. Being that we have Erica here with us, I'd like to have her share a few thoughts about an environment where we have good even temperatures and no temperature stratification. If you don't mind, Erica, will you share a few thoughts on that?
Sure. And, I stressed during my presentation the importance of walking the flock and things like that so we don't get piling. But what I see specifically in aviary barns where they have that capabilities of going all to one side or not, when we see temperature differences, they will pile. And you'll see mortality or a lot of mislaid eggs from that. So it's important to make sure you have even temperature so that the birds continue to stay spread out. And when we talk about litter, obviously it's just a better environment as far as conditions and smell for the workers and for the hens when we have a nice dry litter. And it's just more comfortable for the birds and for the walkers to walk the barn in. So.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to take a few moments here as we switch the screens to show just a little bit about some of the building components as we talk about buildings, construction, and the like. As I mentioned previously, we have to have a good foundation. With a good foundation, we're able to seal the building and make the air inlets the sole source of air coming into the house, as opposed to leaks. And the foundation, I want to emphasize, is one of the areas where that occurs. Another aspect of the building that I like to talk about are straight wall designs. I like to make sure that the house is able to be on the inside and the outside a straight type construction. It enables for easier erection and easier equipment installation. Again, to emphasize, air inlets are what regulates the air in the building, and it should be the air inlets that regulate, not leaks. This particular photograph shows one of our insulated metal panels installed on the building. What doesn't show in this photograph is we seal the bottom of that panel as well, just like the tongue and groove that we have in the male-female end of the IMP panels. We use our particular building, and I'll speak of that, we use in angle iron. It's moving. Oh, I didn't stop it. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to do that, folks. We use an angle iron welded construction, and the trusses are bolted together at the job site and bolted to the columns. This particular building is an enriched system. This is the very same location as it was being finished, and you can see what the inside would look like. We're using a tunnel ventilation system in this, and you can see the way that the ribs of the building run to enhance the tunnel ventilation. I have also the show. The inside of a PULLET system, and you'll notice that the ribs of this are going across the width of the building because this is a cross-ventilated design. And layer system that as was being discussed previously. Again, this one is tunnel ventilated. the outside of a northern environment building that we have, just to give some ideas, because I know majority of the people listening are from the Canadian provinces right now. So with that, I think I'm going to end my discussion and let the other panelists continue. I'd like to thank you for your time. Turn it over to you, Ron.
All right, thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate your information. The next and final presentation will be the journey of the egg from J.D. Williamson. J.D. owns, along with his father, J.D. Williamson Ltd. in London, Ontario. They are the Canadian distributors for MOBA, diamond graders, farm packers, and robotics, as well as their Ontario distributor for Big Dutchman. J.D. lives in Ontario with his family and will be joining us today to explain the journey of the egg. J.D., if you'd like to take it away, please.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks again to PIC for hosting this event and for all of our panelists and attendees today. Just a quick note, we are going a little bit over on time, so hopefully everybody can bear with us. Just a few more minutes here. This is a rather quick presentation, and then we'll get to your questions. As Ron mentioned, our company sells not only the Big Dutchman housing equipment, but also the Diamond and MOBA farm packers, grading, processing, and robotics. So it gives us a bit of a unique insight into what happens to the egg after it leaves your farm. We've talked today about good egg handling and how to make sure you decrease your cracks and your dirts on the farm. So I'm going to take you through a bit of the processes after the egg leaves your building and how those cracks and leaks and dirts are detected, and just to give you a little bit of the other side of things. So go through here, our different slides here, just showing you the makeup of the egg, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, but going to show you how we get that egg to the consumer. The various steps include, of course, an egg laid in a nest, rolls out onto the egg belt. The egg belts will take the eggs onto the collectors. That's your second transfer point. And then off on from the collector to a rod conveyor. The rod conveyor should flow into a packing room, which could be packed by hand or packed on a farm packer, which may look similar to one of these units. Smaller unit here, a 70 case per hour, which is about 25,000 eggs per hour roughly, or a 100 case unit at about 36,000 eggs per hour. And these are just two different ways of accomplishing the same goal, getting those eggs packed into a 30 egg tray that will then go to the grading station. So once the eggs are packed, they need to be palletized. That can either be done by hand or with the use of robotics or a palletizing equipment. They'll be stored in a cooler, sometimes for just a day, sometimes up to a week or more, and then they'll be picked up and sent to the grading station. So here's a typical layout of an egg grader. This one doesn't show a washer and dryer, and I'll get into some of that later, but it shows you here robotic loading of the eggs, what we call an egg loader. And then the main part of the grading machine is located in this area here. This is where all your detection equipment is located. And then after that, after the eggs are weighed, they come to what we call the transfer point, which is located right in here. It's a very critical process where the eggs are transferred down the line. And at this point, the machine knows everything about the egg it needs to know to get it to its final destination. And these are the packing lanes here. And as you can see, there's about 18 to 20 on a machine of this size. This is a 500 case per hour grader, which would be about 180,000 eggs an hour that it would grade. So it's pretty amazing to see how fast they actually do travel on there and how gently they're handled. So these packing lanes would all be set up for small, medium, large, or what have you, and each egg would find its way to its final destination. I'll go through each of these processes now. So loading can be accomplished with a robotic loader or an easy lift pneumatic air, or simply by hand putting one stack at a time on the preloader belts. The eggs are then taken off of they're destacked from their trays, and they're placed on a conveyor system. It's an egg roller system. And depending on the size of your egg grader, that could be just 6 rollers wide, all the way up to about 18 wide. And the eggs will go down these rollers and through the various detection systems. First off, they need to be washed. Now, Canada, North America is one of the only places in the world where we actually do wash eggs. Eggs all come with a coating provided by nature that gets washed off when you wash the egg. So if you've ever been to a grocery store, say in Europe, and you've seen the eggs in the middle of the grocery store and wondered what the heck is going on, it's because they haven't been washed and they haven't removed nature's protective coating. And they're able to keep those eggs out in room temperature because the bacteria cannot penetrate that coating. Once you wash that coating off, you could have bacteria enter. So that's why we always refrigerate our eggs here in Canada. So it's just a little tidbit for you guys. If you've ever seen that and were shocked, don't worry. After the eggs are washed, they go through their first detection system, which is called an egg inspector, and it's looking for dirts and leaks. So the systems all use pretty complicated algorithms that just can detect with a camera system if there is a dirt mark on the egg or if there's a leak coming out of the egg. And at that point, we just signal to the main computer that that egg there is a dirt, and it can be packed into a dirt pack, or it could go around and be washed again. And a leak will just simply go out of the machine just to keep the overall machine clean. The next step would be drying. Drying is very important here as we do print on our eggs in Canada. So it's never more important than any other country to have very, very dry eggs than here in Canada. So that's just achieved by 1, 2, or 3 blowers. A lot of cases, they run up to about 20 horsepower, and they force air down onto the eggs in the rollers. And what that does is with that air volume hitting the egg, it'll take the drips and the moisture of the egg, and it'll actually force it to the bottom of the egg and the bottom of the roller. At which point, on some of these machines, we have a drip sucker, which will actually suck up those drips from the bottom, which keeps the egg dry and keeps the rollers dry. The next detection system would be crack detection. And as you see these little probes here in the photograph, these probes actually have tiny microphones inside them. And believe it or not, the way we detect a crack in an egg is with magnetoacoustics. It's listening to the sound that an egg makes when it's tapped very gently. It'll make a certain sound if that egg is whole and has no cracks. And it'll make a much different sound if there is a crack on the egg. So with about 16 different probes, which touch the egg all over, we can tell if that egg has a crack or not just by the sound that it makes. The next step is UV disinfection. UV disinfection is great for the outer surface of the egg. We don't UV inside the egg, it's just the surface of the egg, and helps to eliminate any remaining bacteria. The next step would be egg weighing. Of course, we weigh our eggs here. That's how they are graded. So we weigh each egg to determine whether it goes into a small, medium, or large pack. From there, the eggs hit that transfer point on the grader, and they now come down to the egg packers. And it's at that point where they're inspected for blood. And that's by analysis of the light spectrum, which is done with these blood detectors flashing a light at the eggs, and the computer recording what kind of light it gets back, how much is absorbed or refracted. And that's all done with algorithms inside the main computer, but it can signal to the computer that that egg, although it looked good through all the various steps before, does have blood inside it, and it'll be dropped out of the system. Next step would just be packing of the eggs. So they go to their respected lanes, small, medium, or large, depending on the brands and the grocery stores that they're going to. And then the cartons are often printed on the side at this stage 2. After that, there can be various ways to palletize these eggs and put them on pallets that will be shipped off to the grocery stores. And they'll maybe be stored before that into a cooler for a day or 2 before they make their way out. But that's when they make their way to the grocery stores and onto the consumer. And that's just a quick presentation on how the egg's handled through the process. So if there are any questions now, all of our panelists are available to take those questions. And I'd like to start by announcing that we will be doing another webinar on September 24th. If we haven't bored you all here today and you would like some more, we'll be available September 24th. And our topic will be building it right. And we're going to go through just different tips on if you're starting a new barn, different tips on building the barn, laying it out right, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, I'll hand it back to Ron.
Before we take some questions, I think it's important. We've heard a number of the speakers here today that have thanked both PIC, Charlotte and Trina, and Tony from Stream Communications for helping us remain. Oh, it looks like I'm breaking up a little bit. Helping us remain on time, which we did a pretty good job of, and make sure our technology works and get us there. And I can't thank them enough for that. It's really important, and these are the people that aren't in front of us. So thank you very much. And with that, I'll bring on some questions.
Okay, I have a few questions. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
You bet.
Okay. Just several people have asked, will this video be available? Yes, we will make sure that it's available via various social media networks from each company. And so here are some questions. I think this one pertains to Ron the most. How do you keep the scratch pad, not the nest pad, clean in an enriched system?
We don't see a lot of problems with scratch pads remaining clean. The birds tend to use them and scratch and roll on them, which it forces the dirt out of them. We're finding that if we've gone to more open scratch pad designs that help keep them cleaner, as well as keeping that area well lit. If there's any darkness at all, they tend not to use the scratch pad as much, and then what happens is we get manure buildup on those pads.
All right. Here's one.
The birds
I'm sorry,
actually using them tend to keep clean.
All right. Sorry, Ron,
Yeah,
you got
I am
cut
absolutely
off there at the end. I'll just move on to the next one here. For Mark.
Okay, no problem.
Okay. Mark, for Southern Canada, what R value would you suggest would be the best?
For the ceilings, a minimum of R of 35, and for the sidewalls, a minimum R of 24 to 25.
Okay. I have 4 here for Erica, but if anybody else wants to chime in, feel free. What is the best method for preventing young pullets from getting caught in the feed chain?
2 different things. One, making sure that you have enough feed in them. You don't want to see that actual chain because when you see that chain, that means the chick can get her foot or something like that caught in there. And then kind of something specific to Dutchman is we actually have what we call chick guards. And they are plastic guards that snap into the feeder. And I don't know if I have any pictures or not, but and that prevents those chicks from getting and sitting in there and getting their legs in there. So those 2 different things. Make sure your feed trough is full enough. If it runs low, you're definitely going to have chicks stuck in there. And second of all, if you have the chance to have something like that chick guard inserted in the feed trough that prevents them from hanging out and riding that feeder, both those things can help reduce the number of chicks that get caught in there.
Okay, the next one is, at what age should the pullets be released?
That, there's not a specific number to that. Okay, so there's a lot of things that can go into making that decision. Are your birds white birds? Are they brown birds? Are they in a Primus facility? Are they in a Phileas system? And the reason that that's not a for sure answer is when we talk about aviaries, you really have to think about your flock. There's not a set time for everything that we talk about. You have to know your flock. You know, are your birds strong enough? Are they starting to jump and show signs? Are they, you know, are they brown birds? Are they white birds? You know, there's different things. The Phileas system, for instance, versus the Primus system alone. The Phileas system will hold them in for another 1 or 2 weeks. So we're talking 5 and 6 weeks old is when we release them, versus in the Primus system where we release them as early as 3 weeks. Just because that Phileas system is higher off the ground than the Primus system. So there's a lot of different things on what your barn looks like and what your birds are like. Say you had a bat with a coxie or something and your birds are just a little bit weaker, a little bit more behind. You're going to want to hold them in a little bit longer than releasing them at 3 weeks. And then making sure your lighting schedule and that they're used to that lighting schedule. If you forgot to start dimming your lights, make sure that you hold on to that and that they're used to your light dim. And then a lot of producers won't release until a Monday. So then they have all week to go through and pick up those birds. So that's one of those things, you know, if you guys have any questions, specific questions on, I have a Primus system with these birds, when should I release? Don't hesitate to get a hold of me personally, call me, email, whatever it is, and we'll run through all those different factors that affect that age. But kind of as a general rule, I'll just throw this out there. Primus system, we're looking at 3 weeks old. Bilious system, we're looking at 5 weeks old.
Thank you. What light intensity do you like to see once they are in the layer barn?
Again, that's not a real set answer. It really depends on your breed. And I try to stay away from light intensities too much because each breed has their specifications. So say if you have, and I'm not favoring anybody, but if you had, say, W36s or you had decal birds in there, you should have a breed guide for each of those different types of birds. And it will show you the intensities that those lights should be at. And the big thing is make sure you have a light meter to measure those intensities because a lot of them will be listed in foot candles. And if you have LED lights, say in your barn, make sure you have an LED light meter to accurately measure that. Your light intensity is going to fluctuate a lot over the life of that hen. And each genetic company has researched that and tested it to show you exactly what's best for their bird. So I don't do a lot of recommendations with that. You need to check with your genetic company that supplies those birds and their breed management guide to get those answers. And then again, just make sure you're actually measuring your light intensity. So.
Okay, here's another one. Have you seen any success alternating the feed run time as regards to movement training?
I'm not sure I totally understand that question. So if you want to rephrase it and throw it back in the Q&A, go ahead. But what I'm going to kind of answer as I took it. Do I alter the feed scheduling to movement with the birds? Yes and no. If you're talking about, do I run the feed at night so that those birds go into the system at night? No, definitely not. I don't think you should train your birds to move with the feed. That's what I do with the lights. You need to train those birds to go up when the lights start dimming, not when you run a feeder. In the layer barn, what we will do is stagger those feedings and have multiple feedings in the morning so that if they're in the nest laying, they know that in another hour, there's going to be another feed run where they have that opportunity to go eat. Vice versa, if they're not in the nest yet, they can go ahead and eat and know that those birds are going to be coming out and they'll have that opportunity to go in so they can make that switch. And I don't know if that's what you're asking, but if it's not, please throw another question out there real quick or get with me and I'll answer more specifically. But there's two sides of it, but I don't like to make the birds move specifically by running the feed. So.
All right. Well, that is all the questions I have. Some of them are repetitive, and so you answered multiple people with the same answer. So thank you, everybody, for your questions. So Ron, you're up.
All right. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end. I apologize for us being a little bit over time. We've reached the end of our program, and I thank you all for coming. I thank all the presenters for giving us their information. I found it valuable myself. So thank you very much, and I appreciate you being here. And remember, September 24th, we'll be talking about building it right. We're going to talk about how the building is located, where we put our equipment, etc., to make sure that our barns are successful. Thank you very much, and everyone have a great day.